Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Intercultural Conversations. This is the third episode, and today we are going to have Camille Thomasset. And just like the last time, I had played a song for Andrea, and this time also I want to play a song for Camille before I invite her to the room. So this is a French song called Peur des filles, that is Be Scared of Girls. You can tell me if I'm actually wrong. Just gonna invite her to join. Hey, Camille.
Hey. Hi, Prasad.
How are you?
I'm good.
I don't know if you're able to hear the song, but I curated this particular French song specifically for you.
Thank you so much. I don't know it actually.
It's called Peur des filles. I think that translates to Be Scared of Girls. It's by a band called Feminist. And I really like this one. Really like this one. So yes, everybody be scared of girls. Especially Camille and me, I guess. So welcome. Welcome, Camille. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm really good, really pleased to be having this chat with you. How are you doing?
Thank you for doing this. I'm very well too, thank you. And I think before we start, I'd like to give a little bit of an introduction to you, a small snippet of your introduction, and then we can get right to it. Yes. So, hi everybody. Thank you so much for joining in. I'm seeing that people are coming in. Hi. And Camille is actually a project manager for International Corporation and Development, and she also manages humanitarian projects. She is a renowned feminist, and through her work, she hopes to one day probably end gender violence. And I'm so grateful that you're actually doing this kind of work and you are vocal about so many issues, Camille, and that's very inspiring to me. And thank you. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your time with us. So, Camille, for many of our audiences, firstly, it would be really nice to know what inspired you, what motivated you to get into this line of work, because it's not everybody's dream, when they're children. I will one day be ending gender violence. That's not the dream we kind of grow up with. Firstly, what has been your inspiration and motivation? And for many people, and especially for me as well, the concept of humanitarian projects. So from a work perspective, what does that mean? How does that look for you work-wise? If you could please share that with us.
Yes. Thank you, Prata. Thank you for that introduction. I think, so in terms of the sector I work in, it's what we call international development, where humanitarian is going to be more for crisis time, like during a war or when people don't have enough food, but the projects I'm mainly working on are more towards sustainable development, like economic development, social development. So it's a bit more long term, it's not like crisis time situation. So that's a distinction to be made. And so what I do basically is working with consultants all around the world, and they have the knowledge. Basically, I don't. They have the knowledge about the topics, and they are the ones who implement the project on the field. And so what I do, I coordinate all of these people, and I just check everything is in line, that type of things. And I just really wanted to work in an environment where there is obviously something meaningful in terms of the impact. Work across cultures, because I feel like that's where you understand the complexity of the world, and that's where you learn so much as well about others and yourself. And it's also a job where I can have my convictions about, gender equality and feminism. I feel like I don't have to hide that. And to me, that was really, really important to not enter a professional sphere and feel like I have to hide that fact most of myself.
Yes, I completely understand with the last bit you said. I think I still am a bit fearful of calling myself a feminist because that is just then immediately associated with you being an angry woman who hates all men. And
Yeah.
I think a little bit of my voice, and I'm still told that, even though I feel I'm not as loud or assertive as I should be about, what my thoughts are. Honestly, the thing is, when I was 17, I used to be that way because there was this incident that had taken place in Delhi where there was, a woman was violated and it was all over the news. And that had really, really moved me. And then I think that's where my idea or my, I think, study for feminism in a way had started. It was very normal, equality is very normal in a sense in my house. I see the differences now, but at least I grew up with that notion that everything is equal. And then when these incidences happen, I kind of became more vocal about women's rights. And then, you get labeled to be a certain kind of a woman. And I think as time passed, I was almost fearful of sharing it. I was
Mm.
fearful of, are they going to then, categorize me as a certain kind of a woman or,
Yeah.
I'm sure that happens to you as well. I think I found more of my voice when I did come to France. I think uh, it's just much more acceptable to be vocal in this way. Not saying that
Yeah.
here there is no space. People in India also do hold space here, and there have been very famous feminists in like the ancient times as well. But still, I definitely think I found my voice. At least I was more confident to do it.
Yeah, no, I feel you like, but I do still feel sometimes I'm, this really annoying, aggressive feminist who's just thinking about it all the time. And
Are you?
definitely.
I know I am.
So, I understand your feeling, and it's not easy to carry that into the professional sphere. And especially when you work with people from all different backgrounds and cultures, like, you're not gonna hear the same responses and the same reactions, and it's you
Yes.
have to walk like a lot of uncertainty about it. It's not, it's not
Definitely.
easy.
Yeah. So yeah, that's interesting, right? And the fact that you bring that up, do you think, especially because you work in this space also of gender inclusion, and then you're vocal about wanting to end gender violence, a lot of your humanitarian projects, I believe, are also related to that. And in that process, you do end up meeting people from different cultures. That could be
Yeah.
people from Asia, that could be also people from Africa, even Europe. Have you seen a difference with what equality means and what especially feminism means for people
Yeah.
from different cultures? Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting. So in my job, like the projects are unfortunately not completely directed towards those topics. So it's more like me bringing those topic up and kind of annoying my colleagues with it. Um, so it's not the priority. So people are not always super familiar with the topic. So I think that the notion of equality is just not something that may always be conscious. That's one thing. Um, and I think it just relates to so many different factors. For some people, it can be professional equality, related to the salary or the type of job that you can have. But maybe the same people believe equality should not be in place at home or in other areas of your life. So and because you don't really end up discussing these topics in details at work, you have to find out for yourself, like when you interact with them. Um, yeah, but I think it's just very different for everyone. Everyone has their different perceptions of what it means, and I think it's just such an important structure of culture as well, like gender roles, because
Yes.
it really defines how you view, like what a woman should do and what men should do, and how does that play into what we do at work or in other areas. So I feel like there's no strict definition for people about gender equality.
Yes, it can be very different because I think um, when I went to Europe, the fight that was happening with respect to equality was very different from that what I was experiencing. And the thing is that it's just so difficult to generalize India. It's not. I just feel that India is different. It's like the European Union. It's different states
Yeah.
together, which we call a country. And there's urban, rural, different socio-economic classes. But what the kind of equality that we were fighting for, it was, basically equality in the house. If there is a division of property, it has to be done equally between male, female, etc. Or it's about equality in getting education, in receiving education. There were relatively more dropouts for girl students in India, I think, in the year 2019 than it was, for example, in France. And when I came to France, it was more about, equality in pay. So the conversation existed, but then the kind of conversations that was happening was so different. So, for example, then in India, a woman is going to go out to work, but then her gender role in the house could be still the same. It's about letting her do and not letting her do. And sometimes I would find that in France as well, but then, the conversation toward the feminist movement there had kind of taken a different path. So I can completely understand when you say that the conversations in different cultures is definitely different. I'm sure it becomes a bit difficult for you to manage that. Is it difficult?
Yeah,
yes?
Yeah. I think as well, like some topics are easier to talk about. For instance, in France, it's easy to talk about the salary, but then when you speak about more like household distribution staff, or just the way people speak to each other and what we consider to be respectful or not for a woman, like, that's much more sensitive, because it's much more related to the behavior, and it requires people to change the way they perceive things. So I do find it frustrating, and I tend to see everything, through that lens as well. So
it's constantly running in your head. Okay, no, this is right, this is wrong, and then when you're vocal about it, it's sometimes perceived differently. So I think even I have adapted myself to how I express myself. I don't know how right or wrong that is. Having to adapt yourself and almost giving up a part of yourself in the way you're expressing it can be difficult. And I know that in France there was this conversation about why things are gendered. There are certain things in the language that are gendered. So a table also has a gender, or a computer has a gender, or a phone has a gender. I think there was talks about changing that as well.
Yeah. There's like a big debate about inclusive writing, what we call inclusive writing in France, and that's creating all sorts of reactions and like I think a lot of controversy from people. But I think it's important because language is how we shape our thinking and our minds. So I feel like every culture and their languages is going to teach you how you view things and how you express yourself to the world. So I feel like it's really important to be inclusive into the way you speak and the way you write, and it kind of opens up what you mean and the possibilities behind it. I don't know how you felt with speaking French, for instance, whether you felt it was like a flexible language or not. So, yeah.
I think I lost you there for a second. It's okay. And what do you think is the most rewarding and, on the contrary, most challenging part of your job? Because even though it's about coordination of humanitarian projects, I'm sure there is a lot of things that you see, and you come from some sort of privilege, at least when you were living there in France, and I definitely openly acknowledge my privilege as well. So, especially when you're doing humanitarian projects, you see such a vast disparity. So I'm sure there are parts of your job that are very challenging, which of course includes cultural differences, and then there are parts of your job that are actually very rewarding. So could you share some insights on that as well?
Yeah, of course. So I think what's really challenging is reaching out, trust and understanding with people who come from a different culture and have very different realities in mind. It can be so frustrating because you want to reach out and you want to, establish that trusting relationship to build things up together. But as you say, I also carry the weight of the history of France and the fact that I'm a white person working sometimes in African countries, that also is really heavy and comes with,
Yeah.
a lot of responsibility, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of not being disrespectful and making sure that like, I'm aware of the power distribution, if I can say, in the world, like obviously not as individuals, but, in terms of what we represent in spite
Mm-hmm.
of ourselves. So that can be really frustrating. But then when you reach out the point of actually having that relationship and trust with people, that has no price. Like that's amazing. And I think that's when you realize that if all sides are really into understanding each other, then everything can work. But it requires time and patience. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I
Yes,
think just dropping your ego as well.
yes, and this is such a conversation that my roommates and I are also having. It's the self and the ego. I think a lot of our thoughts come from a place of ego. And if you as a white person are then interacting with a person in Africa, you are there with an intention to,
Yeah.
do good, but then it may not immediately translate to a person. And then to then let go of your ego and accept that that's the challenging bit for you, then for sure.
Yeah.
So you say that you were in Africa. Is there any particular project that you went there for, or was it just for
Yeah.
research?
No, so I'm working on a project that protects biodiversity and protected areas in Central African countries. So I
Mm-hmm.
work with people from Gabon, Cameroon, Democratic Republic of Congo, and neighboring countries as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I go there regularly just to meet up, see how things are going, make sure everything's on the right track, and check how we can support them in
Yes.
this job. Um, yeah,
And how was
so
your experience there? I mean,
it's
these are so culturally different. Not only France has a colonial history there, but for
yeah.
me, and for our audience who haven't been there, how was then your experience interacting with these countries?
Mm, I think it was a short period of time, so I didn't really have the opportunity to really build things up. But um, I don't know. I feel like because it was a work environment, you don't really get to see the reality of things.
Mm.
Um, I think I'm pretty like I love traveling and going on missions to those places. Like that's really one of the reasons why I do the job that I do. But you always end up, I think, facing a barrier with people and with the situation there, um, and that's quite frustrating. And I think as a woman, it can be a bit difficult as well. Like, um,
Mm-hmm.
but it's interesting because it allows you to put into perspective what others might feel, when they come to France or to supporting different countries, and I think that's really valuable.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for mentioning that. And I think, yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy being in a culture that is completely perceived different to yours
Yeah.
and may not always share the same perspective. And
Mm,
then you do carry some baggage of colonialism also. So I think their association there is directly that.
yeah.
So yeah, I'm sure it's not that easy. And like since we are speaking about projects that you did, and I'm sure that now the times they are changing, and especially the new generation, the Gen Z, would are open to uh, to a career that's very similar to yours. I think before it would be, at least during our times, it would be a challenge in order to take up a career like this. And not that many people then didn't, even after the challenge. But I think the new generation is definitely open to having either a career or putting in their time in this kind of work. So how do you think, for people who are technically not in the space of doing humanitarian work or gender inclusion, how do you think that they can probably make small changes or implement this in their daily lives or in the way that they're living or in their surroundings in order to make some sort of a difference? Because it's not that people don't want to do it, sometimes they don't know how. It's about equipping yourself with the knowledge. And let's face it, everybody has their realities in life that they are going through. There are some situations that they are going through, and you don't want to then sit and study and understand how exactly it can be done. And, we are a generation of quick solutions also. So if there is something that we can do probably in our daily lives in order to create a more inclusive environment, what do you think?
I think I think there's definitely creating space for people to speak up, and that can be multiple things. Like, for instance, in the work environment, I like to make sure that everyone during a meeting can speak, and so especially women, for instance. So you don't address the topic directly, but it's something simple to just say, everyone has their time and the right to speak up in that discussion. And I feel like if you invite people to the table, and then they get used to it, and it becomes more and more a habit, I would say, and it can be something where you don't need to be in opposition, but rather like just building a new type of
culture within the organization. So yes.
I think creating new role models, and that's kind of what you are doing, right, with your project, and just creating some girls that they can do whatever they want, basically. And I think that's so inspiring, it's so important. I think that's also why our generation is better now, that we know things are possible, and that's because we can look up some examples.
Yes. Yes, there was by Esther Duflo. She won the.
Yeah, she was minister.
Yes, Esther Duflo from France, and she's a professor of MIT as well. She's an economist, and she had conducted this research, wherein it was a research that was conducted in small rural villages in India and Bangladesh, if I'm not wrong. And she saw like the panchayat leaders. So panchayat leaders could be the local community leaders in these villages. When they were women, the parents in the village would then, quote unquote, let their female or let their daughters complete higher education, right? As opposed to villages in which the community leaders were usually men, the rate of girls completing their higher education was much lesser. And this is just by having a female role model who's elected at the grassroots levels. Imagine if then we are able to scale that, that's going to create so much of a difference. And it definitely, yes, and I think from a very practical and from an action-based standpoint, I really wish when I was working in my French organizations before, I don't work with them anymore, that they would give me an opportunity or push me. And I think that's where my work actually also comes in intercultural training. You need to kind of motivate people to speak up, especially if they are in the minority in a larger group. It's not that they don't have something to say, it's that they don't feel they have the right to say it. And I think it's very essential to equip them or empower them with the right kind of tools so that they are actually pushed. Do you think that as a woman, especially in this field, I don't know if there is a gender disparity in how many men and women work in the humanitarian field.
So most people I work with are men, like older men, like 45, 50 years old men. And so women really represent like a small proportion of people working in the field. And when we do, I mean, to be fully honest, it's most of the time in communication or administrative roles, but you know, it's very, very gendered in terms of the topics and the types of jobs that women have. And so I think also reminding people that it's important, it's there, like you have to speak about gender, not only when it's 8th of March and people are speaking about it, but the rest of the year on like small topics. It's really important just so it's not forgotten, because oftentimes I feel like people don't even think about it, and then it's kind of forgotten and you don't see it. But if you make space to really put those people, like put women on the front, then little by little people are going to get used to it and feel like it is more normal.
Yes, and you know, you say that it's very essential then to keep talking about it. And I think I find it difficult to do that. I'll tell you why. Because when I keep talking about it, it creates a distance between me and the person.
Yeah.
You know, and this is a difficult conversation, especially to have with men, because the men that I surround with have not really done anything, in their words, wrong to women.
Yeah.
You know, so and it's very easy for anybody to take these comments personally. So if I make a very large comment about, you know, probably gender disparity in your industry, I have heard men say, no, but in my industry it doesn't happen. That means this problem doesn't exist. You know, and then taking that conversation from there, which becomes extremely personal and then comes from extremely personal examples, I have found myself to be very drained in the process, and also losing friends, you know, in a sense, in the process. So I'm just wondering, you know, how do you then find the strength to do it? Is it because the people around you are just naturally more acceptable to these topics? Or have you found a way to communicate it, a kind of sugarcoating it almost? I know it's not right to do, but then you also need to hold that conversation in order for change to happen.
I think you're right. It requires so much energy and thinking to talk about this with people who are not necessarily familiar with it, and sometimes you don't have the strength, and I think that's normal. Like you can't just advocate for gender equality every day of your life and not feel exhausted by it. But I think I drew a line in terms of my expectations. So for instance, at work, I consider that I don't need to convince people, but I need them to respect my principles. So for instance, I don't accept any sort of sexist language or behavior in meetings. Like they know they can't do it with me. Like they know I will expose them if they do. And so I told myself, like, I cannot control those people. I cannot control how they do at home or in their life, but I can control how they behave when I am here in the room. And so, to me, it's more about searching those limits and saying, if you want to work with me, that's how you have to respect. You don't have to agree, but you have to respect that.
It's about then setting boundaries.
Yeah, but I know I cannot convince them. I know I'm not going to change their minds because you don't really have the time to have this conversation.
You have to pick and choose your battles. I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's one lesson I've learned. Till at one point I just given up, but then I was like, no, this cannot happen. Now I shall write a book. It's extreme. It's extreme reactions that come from my side. But yes, I think, you know, little by little, it's about first influencing the immediate circle of influence that you have, and then making a larger impact. And, you know, like culturally then speaking, how do you think like feminism is kind of changing in Europe as compared to in Africa? You know, since you have experience working in both places, and So do you find you know, if there's a difference, if there's a similarity, or if there's change happening at all?
It's tough. I think there's change happening everywhere, but not at the same speed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you were speaking about empowering people and how people lack knowledge as well of, what does it mean and how you implement it. And I think there's a lack of capacity and time dedicated to this, in the countries I'm working with in Central Africa area. And I think it's much more difficult as well because it's very embedded into the culture where, hierarchy and the masculinity of the values and all of those things are what we would call more traditional in Central Africa. So I think it's when you push those subjects, you touch a lot of sensitive topics, which are very important for people. And so you have to be really understanding and careful about what you say because you don't want to, you have to do it with them, you don't have to push something in an insensitive manner. But I think in Europe it's changing, but it's different pockets of society which are more understanding and some people are still resisting. There's always so much more to change, right? You're never
There's
fully
always
finished.
room for, we want more. We want it now.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's moving, but it's probably not enough yet.
Okay, and then hopefully people like you and who are dedicating your lives to this, and you're dedicating your life to also a big part of your life is then to dedicate your work to end gender violence too. So yeah, so I think women like you then will not only be role models but then also eventually build communities in order to kind of have a larger impact, but starting small. So
Exactly.
yeah. And my last question for you, and this is what I do with all of the guests that come, is, I think my word now has been changed, and that change I don't mean, radical change now. From tomorrow, there's going to be a female prime minister in India. I don't mean that. What I mean is, if there's anything that you would want to change within yourself or in your immediate surroundings, in any way, big or small, and it doesn't have to be with respect to your work even, it doesn't have to be humanitarian, but just that aspect of change, what would you like to change?
I think for myself, I think I would hope to be more patient, because we live
Especially
in
with people.
yeah, patient with different people, patient with myself as well into, this process of understanding someone else, understanding their background, their culture, and it's something that takes time and we forget about it oftentimes. And I just wish people would question themselves and the question the message that they receive from one another. I feel like oftentimes people assume a lot of things when they see an email or something that someone said, and they don't really think that there might be a completely different meaning to it. And yeah, and I really wish people would take that time to reflect and question things more. I don't know if that's something you've observed in your trainings or anything, but like,
I think one thing that I do observe, and this is a difference that I noticed with Indian, and especially when Indians are interacting with Germans. So Germans are very direct communicators. So there is direct communication, so there will be one sentence that will be told, and then more context will be provided to that sentence if you ask questions.
yeah.
So if you don't ask questions, you're not going to get more context. As opposed to Indian speakers, we are storytellers. Right? Everything is a story. So we give a lot of context before we actually come to the statement. Right? So then you don't need to ask more questions. You already have all the information that you need. So,
that's amazing.
Yeah, so many young people often are hesitant to ask questions. It's also a general conditioning because there's this word, I don't know if it's there in France or it's called acting smart. So if you're questioning something, especially if you're questioning authority, that means you're acting smart. So there is some sort of a hesitation then to keep asking questions. And that's through intercultural training, and we push, especially the younger ones, the new joinees who are then interacting with the Germans and the French, that hey, asking questions doesn't mean you're questioning somebody's credibility. Asking questions is just wanting more information. So if I want to ask somebody, hey, why are you not a feminist? I'm not forcing you or imposing you to convert into one. It's a discussion. So yes, you're definitely right. There has to be more questions at least asked, especially if you don't have that knowledge. So the reason why I asked you, how do I then be more inclusive in my everyday life? It's me asking you questions because maybe I'm not equipped with that kind of knowledge. So asking you that question doesn't mean a lack of intelligence in a sense, but it just, one question at a time, hopefully we make a better world.
Yeah, no, I've heard that so many times with colleagues where I feel like it felt like I pushed too much, but actually I wanted to understand. And I think people felt, questioned into their job or their role or what they were doing. And I was like, no, I'm not telling you what you did is wrong. I just want to know why, because I'm actually interested in knowing where all of this is coming from. So yeah. I feel you.
Yes. Yes, and Camille, before we go, do you want to probably share any of your social media profiles or anywhere that people can follow you to know more about your work?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, but I'm not a big social media person.
You're there on the ground making the change happen.
Yeah. But no, thank you so much for providing me the space to speak up. And I think it's so important to have those conversations and hear from different people. So thank you.
It's about getting perspective. Thank you. Thank you so much. It was so nice seeing you. And I hopefully see you in person soon.
Yes, that would be great. Yeah. Thank you, Prata.
Thank you. Bye. Bye, everybody. Thank you for joining.
Bye.
Oh, Vishant, you had a question, but Camille is gone. You can DM your questions. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining in. Bye.